you stumbled upon and that you checked?
The latest disinformation or the claim that we have checked, it was related to COVID, the number of deaths. The Minister of Health announced from the tribune of the National Assembly that the number of deaths was around 8,900, and the opposition deputy noted that it was a lie, and he used the word lie because uh, the statistics committee data showed that the number of deaths was 10,000. And we checked, and indeed, the number was 8,900 in the Ministry of Health uh, website and 10,000 in Statistics Committee, and two different figures were presented in two official sources. And for 2 weeks, we tried to understand what was the reason for this discrepancy, because it is not the Statistics Committee compiles the data. They are provided with the source data, and after 3 weeks we received an answer that, and again this issue was raised at the presence of the Prime Minister, because it's been 1.5 years that this issue is not being resolved, and now we were told from the Ministry of Health that they will change the data and we will align it with the data from the Statistics Committee, because there was a mistake there. But I want to note how much time was required from us to check one case. We called with a request to explain us, and this took more than 1 week, and I'm not, let alone that this topic was raised at the session of the government a year ago, and this is to show how, in brackets, how easy it is to cooperate with the state bodies, with the officials, and this is a real issue for the media, for the public, to why disinformation and manipulations spread this much in Armenia. Of course, there is an issue of media literacy. Of course, there is the issue of the factor that social networks have changed the game of the rules of game. But on the other hand, we have the situation where the state officials are not flexible, they do not cooperate with media outlets, and an information vacuum is created, which is filled with conspiracy theories and manipulations. And while we try to understand who is right, who is wrong in all this turmoil, we are facing the complexity of providing reliable information, and we do not receive the support from the state officials. And this is not support, but this is factually their work, their duty, which is not fulfilled. And let alone the cases where you send inquiries about a certain topic, which is they're heated, and you receive a response that you will receive a response in within 30 days. And this is a real challenge for us, because if we consider ourselves responsible to the public, it is important for us that public receives multifaceted, impartial, unbiased information, and form their opinion based on that. And we are facing a serious problem here, because we cannot check this information. In fact-checking journalism, there is a golden rule where you cannot write in your article the phrase "according to our sources." You might receive the information from the minister in person, but if you're unable to quote, to indicate the source, you are not allowed to quote this source. This is a golden rule, even if we have a piece of information which we're convinced that is true. And for example, we can refute this or that information, and we do not receive this green light of mentioning the name, we do not write about it. And in this regard, it is also very important that the state bodies show flexibility and perform their duty properly so that no information vacuum is created. Ani, so going back to the question, what type of disinformation you encounter, and in your impression, where are they generated from? How are they generated? Please speak about this briefly. In fact, this so-called misinformation, which we do not have in Armenia, the deliberate one is disinformation. The unintended one is misinformation. I cannot say that they are equal, but depending on the situation, for example, if there is an emergency situation or tension on the border, in this case, a big flow of disinformation is created, and both misinformation and disinformation are spread, and both from internal and external actors. And in this regard, it is a major issue for us to have unbiased quality media outlets, because for me, this is a very sad topic, because we have a lack of quality and conscientious media outlets which consider themselves responsible to the public. The most important issue is to whom you consider yourself responsible, to a political force or to the public, whether the interest of the public is your interest as well. And in this regard, I can quote some facts, since based on our work, we deal with different contents of different media outlets. We monitor what the media outlets write. Many times I have the idea that a media outlet or a journalist who considers themselves responsible and accountable, they would not publish such a material. They are guided by other interests. And in this case, we are actually dealing with this deliberate disinformation. Also, we should speak about the values, whether they hold the value of the interest of the public, and also the non-professional attitude and the lack of knowledge of the fact-checking tools, and is another challenge, is problematic, and creates problems for all of us. Thank you, Ani. Ms. Minasyan, we heard some, we saw some stones thrown into your yard, so-called. I would like you to talk about what should the media do, which is conscientious, which has good faith, which wants to verify and convey verified information to the public, but they're deprived of this opportunity. So Ani brought an example regarding COVID. So it is a piece of information provided from state officials. So not all journalists, not all media outlets can afford having fact-checking teams and distinguish and put efforts in checking all this information within all this information flow. And we encounter many cases where this information flows come from state sources, but I'm more prone to considering it misinformation and not disinformation. So you occupied the post of the SNCO, affiliated to the office of the Prime Minister. So what impressions do you have, and what do you plan to do to address this issue so that the conscientious journalists and media have the opportunity to gain precise and comprehensive information from state officials? Thank you, Ms. Again, and thank you for the invitation and for this forum, because I believe that independent media is an indispensable part of democracy. And I don't agree with your observation that some stones were thrown at us, because I value and appreciate a constructive criticism so that the government improves its cooperation and interaction with media outlets. And it enables us to achieve our goals. Within the scope of fight against disinformation, I emphasized several tools of disinformation, which are most important, of utmost importance in terms of public and in terms of government. I think that the primary obligation is to be the primary source of information, and also, as my colleague mentioned, that the inquiries are being delayed, the responses to inquiries are being delayed, and it is hard to be provided with information. It is due to the omission and gap in the work of the media departments, PR departments of state bodies, and we should avoid this 30 days of analysis if the debates are heated, if the topic is heated, and people and the body should be given appropriate time in order to respond to these topics. And the second one is the factor which was included in our standards for education, which is the media literacy factor, and our growing generation becomes more media literate. And I would like to speak about independent media in general. What is the definition of independent media? Whether we have independent media in Armenia, or we should agree with Mr. Melikian's observation that independent media is considered quality information provider. And in my opinion, if the public is aware of the policy adopted by this or that media outlet, and if the media outlet declares its policy and that they have made this or that decision and they are guided by it, this is considered an independent media. But can we consider a media outlet independent if they are under some political forces? So or are they necessarily low quality media? So whether the media outlets which have international grants can be considered independent if they are not declaring their policy. Dear Ms. Minasian, sorry for interruption. We want to have answers from you. The questions are multiple. What steps are being taken by the authorities, by the government, to facilitate, to support the work of the media outlets, so that the media outlets have the opportunity to gain information from you, because you are representing the legislative power, so that they have the opportunity to receive the necessary information and they not become disinformation spreading media outlet. Thank you for reminding me, but since I'm here as a representative of the legislative power and not as a former SNCO director, the SNCO current director is here and they will reply to your questions. But I was raising the issues which would lead to the answers of the last time we spoke about the cooperation, the memorandum of understanding between media representatives and the legislative power, and they will participate in the development of legal drafts, and I think that all these issues will be addressed through this memorandum of understanding. According to me, what should the government and the legislative power do? There is a legislative initiative about the media transparency bill, so that the public is aware of the beneficial owners, which will lead to financial transparency, and financial transparency will decrease the opportunity of maneuvers, and financial transparency may lead to strengthening independent media. And the second one is the self-regulating body, which in legislative terms, and based on which we can strengthen quality media and push back at the low quality media. Oh, please, half a minute. I would like to speak about the advantages and disadvantages of strengthening independent media. The advantage is consider the quality information provided to the public and exclusion of disinformation, but we're walking on a thin line here because we all have to consider when we speak about certain media strengthening, we are speaking about the polarization within the media, which is present within the media and public, which can be even exacerbated. And we need to be very delicate and sensitive in using this tool set so that we don't push back the public sector, which is under the control of disinformation and low quality information. Thank you very much. And this is exactly why it is important that the state officials, state bodies are proactive in terms of accountability. And I would like to give the floor to Karina Avedisyan, and I would like to ask her to speak about her observations. She's expert of of political communications. What should be done to build proper communication with the public, especially in crisis situations and within and given the recent experience of Armenia, what recommendations or pieces of advice you can give? I wish to note that Karina will deliver her speech in English, so you can use the headphones. Yes, me poker.
Yeah. And I'll start by saying disinformation isn't really a fight for what the truth is. It's rather a fight for the very fact that the truth exists. Because disinformation is increasingly putting pressure on public life in democracies worldwide. Democratic societies operate on the idea that the truth is knowable. But disinformation encourages skepticism that there is an objective truth, undermining the foundation of an informed citizenry capable of making decisions for itself. It also undermines the very idea that there can be shared narratives within a society. Those who spread disinformation aim to undermine citizens' trust in institutions that uphold the truth, such as independent professional media. And if they succeed, democracy is endangered, because without a shared set of facts, it cannot exist. As historian Timothy Snyder said, quote, "To abandon facts is to abandon freedom. If nothing is true, then no one can criticize power because there's no basis upon which to do so." Therefore, the role of independent media and journalists extends beyond merely providing accurate information to the public. They're frontline workers in safeguarding democratic resilience. Unfortunately, the threat of disinformation is growing just as we're experiencing a decline in independent journalism. With independent media facing a crisis worldwide, what role should governments play? How can we support independent media when the factors driving its decline, technological, financial, social, political, and institutional, are so complex and difficult to disentangle? Complexity should not be an excuse for inaction. To address disinformation at the country level, a whole of society approach is necessary because the problem cannot be solved by government alone. To effectively combat disinformation, every actor in society must be empowered to play a role, and the state must play a sort of coordinating role. In Armenia, strategies to counter disinformation have so far seemed to be fragmented and focused on correction rather than a sort of systematic whole of society approach. Following conversations that I've had with experts and research that I've done on international best practices for countering disinformation, I've developed just a few kind of general recommendations that I wanted to talk about here. First is for the first set is for government. The Armenian government must ensure kind of inclusivity So in this case, I mean the participation of independent journalists and media organizations in policymaking around disinformation. This participation should be institutionalized and become a permanent feature of policy discussions. And I say this because this will ensure that policies are informed by those on the front lines of fighting disinformation, and they'll help to make sure that disinformation actions don't endanger freedom of expression and freedom of speech. The second kind of recommendation is sort of for government, but also for media as well. It's about conceptual clarity. So my co-panelists have already just talked about, the differences between disinformation, misinformation, malinformation, and in Armenian, it's all kind of known as, under the umbrella of disinformation. But there should be clear legal definitions for disinformation and its related terms, and they should be integrated into the national legal framework. And these definitions should be more or less based on those recognized and observed at the international level. To inform and shape policy and strategy, we need to agree on a taxonomy of disinformation-related terms, because the appropriate response to an information threat depends on whether the threat is mal, mis, or disinformation, foreign interference, hybrid threat, and the rest. So formalizing and adopting official definitions, which then independent media should, consistently use, can help move the country from fragmentary methods to a more systematic approach. And it's important also for, everyone sort of across the board to be consistent in their use of this terminology. The third point I have for government, again, this has been touched on by my co-panelist, government needs to respond more rapidly to disinformation. And I'm not just referring to the need for a strategic communication policy, which is also currently lacking. At a minimum, government should be able to quickly respond to false claims circulating in the public domain. Independent media outlets are often swift to identify mis and disinformation, and their journalistic agility and commitment to integrity enable them to investigate and disprove false information in a timely manner. However, the government is often slow to debunk claims or altogether refuses to comment and set the record straight. And this hinders journalists' work, as they cannot report on something without official confirmation or denial. And this, again, as my co-panelists mentioned, this creates an informational vacuum, which is then exploited by purveyors of disinformation and filled with other false claims or conspiracies. So by providing accurate and timely information, the government can support the media in efforts to prevent the rapid spread of mis and disinformation and inform the public with verified facts. So for independent media, one recommendation, and media has been doing a great job in the following kind of recommendations that I'm mentioning, but it's just something to keep in mind, to include more diverse and pluralistic voices, both in the newsrooms and in terms of coverage and whose voices you're kind of platforming in your coverage. By including voices from diverse ethnic, sexual, and class backgrounds in stories that aren't necessarily about their identities, we can foster healthy public discourse. Misinformation and disinformation in Armenia often target vulnerable groups, such as people from LGBTQ communities, women, ethnic minorities, and amplify and exacerbate those social divisions that disinformation so seeks to exploit. Hearing from these voices in different contexts can bring them back into the conversation as vital parts of society and helps reduce disinformation's impact on those social divisions. Armenia's independent media and civil society should also increase their participation in regional coalitions, and I know many of you here are doing that. This is also more effective in securing donor funding, and it can drive national reform efforts in a way that kind of being isolated doesn't facilitate those kinds of impacts. And this can help also address cross-border disinformation campaigns. Joint efforts can include sharing best practices, coordinating responses, and promoting global standards for countering disinformation. So just to finish, responses to countering disinformation must involve engaging in human rights, freedom of information, and internet freedom. These may not directly involve fighting disinformation, but they do contribute to the creation of society-wide resilience to information pollution through support for journalists and media, policy, legislative analysis, and recommendations. Armenia has made massive strides in the field in recent years, but preserving that progress depends on continuing to get it right and battling disinformation at every level of society.
Շնորհակալություն։ Պարոն Մելիքյան, մենք արդեն հնարավորություն ունեցանք խոսելու այն խնդիրների մասին։
Mr. Melikian, we already had the opportunity to speak about the issues that not so conscientious media outlets are encountering and the public is encountering, is facing. But the public has the right to receive quality and reliable information about everything that is going on in the country. And very often we're deprived of this opportunity. What can a conscientious media outlet do if they do not have an opportunity to ensure security? And this has been voiced by media outlets recently a lot, and I addressed a criticizing observation to the government representatives, and where there is an attempt to justify the provision of low quality information. So my question is the following: what can be done by the journalist community to self-regulate and to develop internal criteria and standards as it is done in many European countries? For example, if any member of the community violates the code of conduct, they are being removed of that community. And how can we achieve this so that we can self-regulate and we have such a regime of self-regulation and such standards which will make us not interested in low-quality information and journalism? Sadly, all over the world, low-quality information and journalism is not carried out in such conditions, which is not beneficial. We know that yellow press has much more publications rather than quality media, and we are also aware that the so-called soap operas, which have low level and low added value, as a rule, rather than the quality films, they have bigger audience, and this we should put up with this to some extent. But when I'm saying that the state also has a role to play in fight against disinformation, and the society also, and the journalist community has a role to play in this. I mean exactly this, because first of all, the society cannot just stand aside and expect quality information. Maybe they might say so, but we need to have a social demand formulated to fight against these lies, fake news, disinformation, defamation, and offenses, hate speech, to reject, to negate this, all of this. And there must be a social demand. And the modern society, modern media is for thinking person. Whoever doesn't want to check other sources, they need to understand that they are media illiterate and they are facing a major risk of being disinformed. What should the state do? Of course, the state has the obligation to develop legal regulations and to revise them and to take such steps which will contribute to or will incentivize the quality media and will contribute to the reduction of disinformation. As for the journalist community, of course, the biggest obligation lies with them. And in the modern world, hasn't been the modern world has not devised of something more effective than fact-checking to fight against disinformation, and this fact-checking must become a component of media literacy. So if an ordinary person, ordinary human, so it has to spread among the public, among the society, and not be done by individual organizations or units. And if this becomes more circulated and spread within the society, they will be able to distinguish between truth and fake news. And the most important thing is self-regulation. If this fails within the journalist community, within the media field, it is not excluded, it is not ruled out that it would be more efficient to have systematization, the legal, which is a symbiosis of legal regulation and self-regulation, which might be effective, and this is different in different countries. And here we should also take into consideration some peculiarities of the mentality of the society, of the code of conduct, and in the journalist community. So there are different aspects, and of course here there is a need to state that you should choose whether you are protecting the interests of the society through observing the journalist ethics. You ensure the beneficial ownership of financial resources. You are aimed at providing information to the society. So this is to a broader circle of the society. So if you are not meeting this criteria, then you are not a media outlet, but you are just a self-expression means. And I have encountered this approach in many European countries, and I believe that such a distinction is taking place. Thank you.
I'd like to address my question to you. In your speech, you mentioned that for you, it's very sad to see that in the course of your activities, you saw a lot of different examples of disinformation that are continually published by different media outlets. We do know very well that in many countries, there are many regulations in effect that includes European countries as well. Take Germany, France. In this context, do you see any need in Armenia for such regulation, or do you nonetheless think that the best path is to always have the dominant quality production, and then the audience, the reader, over time would prefer automatically and naturally to choose the quality outlet? Personally, I do not adhere to any regulations. I do not, because that's very problematic. On the one hand, we've seen regulations about hate speech. It was enacted, and we'll see how selective it was, the rule. And then, as far as this is concerned, we can never be sure that later on this tool is not going to be used as a tool to suppress independent media. I am more inclined to choose to have quality journalism, and I would like to speak about another thing. It's very important that the false information, false news, and the disinformation is not only denied, but also fact-based and quality sources that have been checked in the content from them. Why are they spread so adversely like that because there's no content, there's literally no article that people would search. And I think in this regard, it's important the proper creation of content to happen simultaneously, both refuting and the creation of proper quality content. And the raising of the levels of media literacy is very important. In recent years, many organizations, including us and the Media Initiative Center, have taken great efforts on state to conduct classes and educational trainings with different parts of the society. What are the red flags that the society must pay attention to? But the problem remains to be very topical even today. And I believe the role of the state, the role of the government is very important here because we have just started to talk about education, teaching of media literacy, or incorporating courses in the curricula in school. And it really depends on what age groups will benefit from this because schools alone are not enough. I know there's a TV program on the public television run by Mr. Samvel Martirosyan. I'm very happy to see a program like that on television, but I believe the efforts made should be greater to be able to really accomplish better achievements. In this, I am against any regulation. Thank you. I would like to hear Karina's remark on this issue. How do you see the resolution to be? Do the quality media need greater support, taking into account the good practice, good international practice, or do we need to emphasize more on media literacy in the public?
I would say, again, going back to the overall sort of recommendation that I gave of this whole of society approach, and I think that's super important to keep in mind as we consider these interventions because this is about societal resilience. Key aspects of our societal function are increasingly being held by private actors, right? Outside of government. So that's why everyone needs to be empowered to kind of play a role. In terms of, the importance of debunking and fact checking, I can't understate it. I mean, it's overstated rather. It's absolutely critical that societies have that, right, for the record. I just want to make a note, though, that doesn't, kind of stop disinformation, as we probably know, at least, intuitively. Research that I'd done on for the British government on Russia as a state threat in terms of its disinformation campaigns was interesting in the sense that we found, and this is maybe common knowledge now, but this was back in 2018, when disinformation is kind of uncovered, right, there's a false claim made and it's debunked and it goes into the public record, we found that other state bodies would continue putting out the old disinformation, even though other parts of the government were putting out some, a different kind of piece of information. And it became clear that the goal here was not to convince audiences of their righteousness, of like, Moscow, for example. The goal was to litter the information space with as much contradictory information as to render the reader apathetic. So someone who's, has cursory familiarity with the context would look and try and find out what's actually happening, and just see all this, contradictory information. You just say, this is too complex. I can't get my head around this, and you leave it alone. And that's the goal. Which is why, as again my co-panelist Ani was saying, having legitimate sources of information that have that authority is really important, and that happens over time. That's also a two-way street, right, with society. So there needs to be mutual trust, and trust is obviously decreased for many different reasons in Armenia specifically, but around the world in terms of institutions like the press. And one of the most important ways to do that is transparency, is to build that trust. And then with that trust comes authority over time. So that it's a kind of a complex, mutually reinforcing dynamic that we need to consider as we think about specific strategies and tactics to kind of address that step by step.
Շնորհակալություն համապարփակ ներկայացնելու համար։ Ես ընդհանրապես մի փոքրիկ
Thank you very
դիտարկում
much for your concise introduction. I would like to make a note regarding about fact checking and refutals as means to fight against disinformation. It has been scientifically proven that about 40% of the people who have read disinformative news, false news, they do not ever follow up with reading the refutal or the check-in. And it so happens that the 40% just remain under the influence of the disinformation they have fallen victim for. And in the fight, there's no really mechanism to deliver the check, to claim that this is false. The information that was initially spread remains. It's never deleted, it's never removed. And it often happens that the user accesses it and it spread. It only sees the segmented piece of news. There was a refutal, there was a clarification, but they're not delivered this. And when I was speaking about the regulations, I meant that perhaps I do share, of course, we do not need such rigid regulations and that self-regulation is the better preferred way, but at least in such technical matters, we might really consider the need or the possibility of using this mechanism. So when the diagnosis has been given, these lies should be removed. Just briefly about this, there is a chance we can do this. Facebook, Instagram, now Twitter as well. I think Twitter is giving this up now, but they do have the tool that allow the possibility to report and remove fake news. But in order to use this tool, you need to become a member of the international society, international network of fact checkers. And we became a member of this network. We're the first in Armenia, by the way. But this process, the process to use this tool is a long-term endeavor. We do have previous practice like that. It was media.am who, I think it was in the, regarding the parliamentary elections in 2021. When misinformative articles on Facebook were being reported, but then there was a huge lawsuit that was opened and it's still in progress. And I do believe the times befalling us in the future are not going to be easy because I understand what a burden it is for the media outlet, because, you know, once the news item is removed, their visibility is decreased. And we do know that there will be a lot of challenges we will have to tackle because a lot of our colleagues are going to have problems with us. Media AM was a precedent because usually this is starts the offing for a lawsuit. But for us, public interest is of utmost importance. I hope they will forgive us and at least not spread more disinformation on the media. And I hope that you have been very careful and very detailed so as to avoid duplicating your comments so that we do not harm the interests of our colleagues. This needs to be done carefully. Please, Mr. Melikan, and then once you're done, we'll accept questions and comments from the audience. I would like to extend now my minute disagreement to Henri's remark. It was not very original in the sense that you know, whenever you want to be against any regulation. In this regard, I want to say that you need to find your peace with the fact that in Armenia, forever and ever, we are going to see wild journalism in effect, because because sometimes your approach might not be professional enough. Number one, newspaper magazine might be a newspaper that does not meet any ethical norms or standards, completely neglecting them, and such outlets, such newspapers, and that they have the courage and the decency and the audacity to open a lawsuit against Media Initiative Center. I think CivilNet was the only body that really undertook the responsibility of conducting quality journalism, but there are hundreds of outlets that litter the media environment in Armenia, and when They bring a reference and say, how does the United States of America, for example, use just one regulation without the legislation? And I always say, please accomplish the 200 years old democratic legacy that the United States has been able to generate, or at least maybe inherit, maybe create for yourself the heritage, or duplicate that other nations have received, and then talk about this. But this is a very transformative, transitional process, and this transformation is taking place in many different countries in the world. And the 3 or 4 conditions that differentiates a news media outlet from a means of self-expression, and I do believe that the newspaper I hinted at is more a means of self-expression rather than a media outlet, then we need to just find peace with the fact that this is the burden, this is our fate, the cross we have to carry, because there's no recovery we're going to enjoy. I'm sorry for stopping you due to the lack of time, but I think what Ani really meant was slightly different from what you were saying, but it is time to accept questions from the audience. Please present yourself before voicing your question. Thank you. Thank you very much. Գործառուկյան, Public Relations and Information Center. As you probably could forecast, my question is addressed to Ani regarding regulations. I would like to briefly describe the situation we're in now. There are many media outlets and as Mr. Melikian presented, means of self-expression, whose publications are viewed by tens of thousands of people. And that is not an exaggeration. People who spread pure disinformation. Of course, some true information is also spread, but the majority would be disinformation. So the refutals and the commenting on such false information are often, as mentioned, are less viewed. And the disinformative news that are not really harmless or innocent by nature, but they're very targeted, very psychologically effective, inducing terror as well. They're often against the army, against communities on the border, the people who live there. How do we protect the people, the viewers who are 30, 40, 50,000 without any regulation tools? I want to clarify an important thing a priori. We need to understand how we define a quality media outlet. It is really important now because for me personally, and this is my personal opinion, a quality media outlet I'm sorry, is only the body that's very transparent in their financing. At least they're playing the game fairly. You know who the owners are, who they're financed by. Do they have an editorial policy at all or not? And in this regard, I do agree that I do believe that we need a very distinct regulation, and we've been speaking about this for years. It's not that I'm against this, but on the other hand, we're trying to develop a culture in the public. When dealing with a media outlet, you need to understand what the source is. So you're reading an article on any media outlet, do try to understand if it's a media outlet or just a means of self-expression. So as far as this is concerned, there's no disagreement. The rules of the game should be made very distinct and clarified. And for years, I cannot understand why things have been so complex and so difficult to attain. I do understand that there's perhaps we do have great expectations from the state that the regulation should be brought to effect. And for me personally, when you come as a journalist, I think the very first the response you get from the journalistic community or the public is very negative, and it's not due to your activities, it's not due to your past at all, but it's because of the people who are doing their job pretty badly. That is the reason why the journalists in our society are not trusted by the public at all. I was just going to give the stage to other participants for their questions. I think another participant also wanted to ask their question, please, if you don't mind. My name is Geram Vartanyan from Media Initiative Centers. I'm the editor of Media.am. We were talking about regulations. Just to continue the strain of thought as you were discussing us, I would like to highlight an important point or establish it and then move on. Fact-checking on Facebook, the tool that Facebook uses is not about media outlets, news outlets, it's not about the media. It is only to protect the Facebook users from disinformation. So if you viewed this tool from this perspective as somebody that alters the editorial activities of the editors, I think it's just a very bad starting point. And unfortunately, the 2 months that we did use this project in Armenia, it showed that many media outlets in Armenia act as behaving and of coordinated behavior, just a network of media outlets that are governed, that are ruled. I hope the situation has changed and we need to solve this problem, because if a publication is just an outlet for conspiracy and hatred and other such disinformation and just act this way, it's a problem, and it needs to be discussed by the larger community. And as a starting point, the project is not about media and news outlets. Please. Thank you. Gerasim Gasparyan from Boon TV. I would like to continue the thought of my colleague, but also contradict it in a certain way, because when we expect regulations from the state, it is always an indication of delimitations we're going to have to face. We use different adjectives: quality media, trustful media, etc. And who is the body to assess their quality or their truthfulness? We were talking about Europe and the USA and their differences. I do not believe it's only the results of the 200 years. I think they're very different, and it's in the Anglo-Saxon reality. It's done through the court, and in other realities, it's only verified by the court. So it's the court is not the body who implements this. So if the media is regulated by all these indicators, we always delimit it, because simply we do not like it. The standpoint from which they comment a certain happening, a certain an incident. And you mentioned that transparency was important and the real stakeholders need to be mentioned. For 2 years now, we indicate the real stakeholders. And this regulation is in effect. As far as transparency is concerned, in all of our reports, trimester, semester, annual, the audits, they're transparent for all of the stakeholders, all of the relevant bodies, and through the code of ethics, through the regulations, all media sources need to take the responsibility and publicize it as we do. It is mentioned on our website, and our colleagues can see it as well. If two bodies do it, everybody else will know. This is the question I would like to be addressed very elegantly, if you will, because in transitive cultures like Armenia, especially in countries that are in such security challenges, there might be very problematic issues at stake. You know, and until September 27, 2020, any criticism against the army was deemed as a threat against the security of the country, and the same logic that you just mentioned. That's what it sounded like. But did it really cause harm to the army? Or if the voice had been louder, changes would have been greater. This is a very sensitive problem, if you will. And that's exactly what I want. I would not want news outlets to be so regulated by them, because the destination is very dangerous. I apologize for interrupting, but we need to stop now. Something sad is going to happen. We're going to miss the lunch break. If you're okay with this, we can continue, but okay, Ms. Minasyan. I think the discussion went the wrong way. I cannot see where we digressed, but when we're talking about regulation, we do not necessarily say that the state needs to in any way regulate the activities of the media by any regulations or codes. We're talking about self-regulation. So we all know very well the law on mass media, and we really know very well that it's not very complete, it's not very concise, and there's not even a single definition for mass media or the definition for the term of self-regulation. We do know that there's the system for financial transparency is in effect, but this is not what we're talking about. All we're talking about is the system for the self-regulation for the media. So there are systems that are not steered as they should be. No, there's an Ashot Melikan perhaps knows about this. There's an initiative to improve that. There's a draft law for the independence of media, transparency of media outlets that is still being discussed. But yeah. I'm sorry, please. Very briefly about who the body is that assesses the quality and the transparency. 98% of all of the public who does not trust the media is the body that evaluates them. Mr. Melikan, I know you're referring to the research by Aira. Perhaps we need some more fact-checking here. We cannot really believe in that so naively. I know it's a painful topic and it's not easy to hear this, but if you do conduct fact-checking and then instead of 2, your results show 12%, it's still of great concern. Excuse me, let me finish. I have not met, and from Anis's reaction, from your reaction, it's pretty obvious. You're still part of the well-respected media. And I'm stating what the State Department has listed. Excuse me, what did you call us? I'm sorry? If there were people, representatives from the very popular and very famous platforms and newspapers who think their activity is a pure standard or the cornerstone of Armenian journalism, you could see the resistance, what kind of resistance you need to withstand. Not necessarily to achieve a proper systematic regulation, but to attain at least self-regulation. And the heights that speak from about the code of ethics and chains used to chain down all the bodies, and how wildly they want to fill the field and then just to nourish the public. And this is what they do. It's of course sad, it's a tragedy, but this is the culture we're trying to fight against and overcome. There's no list. I think that's just my personal taste. You might have a different taste, and all of the all those news outlets might still consider themselves as the cornerstone of Armenian Jerusalem, but they even haven't studied international practice. Thank you. One last question from Liana. Good afternoon. My name is Liana Sayadyan. I'm the deputy editor of Yelk. I would like to address my question to Mr. Tsarukyan. Our discussion started from the information that the state does not react to disinformation or the questions addressed by the journalists, and we do see that there are constantly trainings in place for their speakers, but very often with the spokespersons that as we have seen, us journalists, we understand that the spokespersons that they save no effort for the reaction to be delivered, but there's a resistance from their from the hierarchy, if you will. I would like to ask you, your center, do you at all cooperate with the members of the government so they are transparent for the journalists and for the public? Because there are people in the government that have, since the moment of their appointment, have not even given an interview. For example, the head of the police, about which the journalists constantly complain. Do you cooperate with them to deliver to them to the standards that we all expect, to disseminate the spirit of democracy among them? And do you at all do anything with them? Thank you very much. Our panel discussion started a little bit early. It is duly stated by you. It's fair enough that you said that we have noted this problem as well. There are setbacks, a lot of such setbacks, but I would not agree with you in your offer for resolution, because you mentioned a mechanism in the center of which is the official. But our practice shows that the more we focus, the more resources are spent on the official. They, in the course of just a single month, might change, and then we have to address the same problems and retrain them over and over again. So in our opinion, the solution should be more institutional than individual, and what it is, that is the existence of very distinct protocols. We have initiated our activities in this directive. We have addressed them as communication protocols, if you will, and in specific measures with specific people in charge, with a specific description for the content or the nature of the issue or the problem. The mechanism should be duly stated as to how the subordination or the entire body should behave in the process of communication, how they should collect information, who from, in what time limits, who is to analyze, examine, and pass it on to the media outlets. So if all of this is duly mentioned or stated on paper, we will have a proper foundation on which we will be able to identify such setbacks. Until we do, how often they should give interviews, maybe 100 days after the appointment, how many times during the day, all of this, we would not be able to solve the problem, because it's very much decided by an individual. Thank you for your response. Thank you for your participation, for your questions that you raised. Thank you to our panelists indeed. And I really hope that we're not too late for the lunch break. Please, you're welcome. Just one notification. The restaurant is right beside the main entrance. This is where we're heading to now.
Բարև բոլորին, մենք մի քիչ ուշացանք, բայց նաև գիտեմ, որ մեր մասնակիցներից մի քանիսը պայմանավորված են եւ պիտի դեռ հասցնեն մյուս հանդիպումներին, ուստի առաջարկում եմ, որ արդեն սկսենք։ Բարև բոլորին, ես Հեղինե Բունյաթյանն եմ, Ազատություն ռադիոկայանի հայկական ծառայության ղեկավարը եւ այսօր այստեղ հավաքվել ենք քննարկելու մի թեմա, որի շուրջ թերևս հարցերը ավելի շատ են, քան պատասխանները։ Թավարության ձգտող երկրներում արդյոք մամուլը կամ լրատվական դաշտը պիտի կարգավորվի, ինչ գործիքներով պիտի կարգավորվի, ում ձեռքին պետք է լինեն այդ գործիքները եւ ով պետք է վերահսկի, որ այդ գործիքների կիրարկումը չդառնա մահակ լրատվամիջոցներին ճնշելու համար։ Ինչպես պետք է որոշել, թե որն է այն նեղ շահը, նեղ արահետը, որը բաժանում է հանրային շահը, ճշմարտությունը իմանալու եւ տեղեկացված լինելու, եւ մյուս կողմից երաշխավորում է խոսքի եւ մամուլի ազատությունը։ Ու եթե հաշվի առնենք, որ լրատվական դաշտում ամեն ինչ շատ արագ փոփոխվում է եւ սոցիալական հարթակների հեղափոխությունն էլ մենք չենք հասցնում իրենց հետևից, իրենք չեն հասցնում մեր հետևից, այս դեպքում պատկերը շատ ավելի խճճված է դառնում։ Ու այսօր այդ հարցերի պատասխանները գտնելու կամ միասին քննարկելու համար մենք հրավիրել ենք Արդարադատության նախարարության օրենսդրության զարգացման կենտրոն հիմնադրամի տնօրեն Տիգրան Դադունցին, բարև ձեզ պարոն Դադունց, հանրային կապերի եւ տեղեկատվության կենտրոն պետական ոչ կառավարական կազմակերպության տնօրեն Գործ Արոկյանին, Միջազգային հանրապետական ինստիտուտի ծրագրերի համակարգող Աննա Նաղդալյանին եւ Երևանի մամուլի ակումբի նախագահ Բորիս Նավասարդյանին։ Շատ շնորհակալ եմ մեր բանախոսներին եւ հյուրերին։ Ենթադրում եմ, որ կլինեն շատ ակտիվ քննարկումների ընթացքում կփորձենք նաեւ բացի իմ նշած հարցերի շրջանակում եւ դրանից դուրս գտնել հնարավոր թեմաներ, հնարավոր պատասխաններ։ Նախ ամենասկզբում ուզում եմ լրագրության պատմության հայտնի օրինակներից մեկը բերել, պենտագոնյան թղթերը, որոնք 1970-ականներին մեծ լույս սփռեցին Վիետնամի դեմ ամերիկյան պատերազմի վրա։ Եվ երբ կարդում էի ես պատմությունը, թե ինչպես էր դրանք գաղտնազերծողը թղթերը տարել New York Times, շատ հետաքրքիր մի դրվագ կար, որ New York Times-ին խորհրդատվական ծառայություններ մատուցող ընկերությունը ի սկզբանե դեմ էր եղել, որ դրանք հրապարակվեին կամ գաղտնազերծվեին։ Բայց New York Times-ի իրավաբանը ուսումնասիրելուց հետո գտել էր, որ հանրության շահը շատ ավելի կարևոր է, առաջնային է, եւ հենց այդ թղթերի հրապարակումն էր, որ ի վերջո թույլ տվեց փորձագետներին եւ լրագրողներին արձանագրել, որ պատերազմի ընթացքում ամերիկյան վարչակազմը ստել է ոչ միայն Ամերիկայի ժողովրդին, այլև կոնգրեսին։
The Congress.
44-օրյա պատերազմի պատմությունը եւ սահմանափակումները եւ ապրում ենք մի երկրում, որտեղ
That came as a consequence, and we live in a country where unfortunately these clashes, the escalation might resume at any given moment. I would like to ask Mr. Daduns to see if the government has a vision today as to what tools should be used in such a situation and how should they be applied. Thank you very much for the question. Frankly, it relates more closely to information security and the problems thereof and how to act in such situations. But if we try to transcend your question and relate it to media as well, if we were to paraphrase the question, how can we make sure that the media means are able to better use the information flow and be informatively responsible? Why is this important? Because media outlets, they fulfill the function of a public watchdog, and they're huge sources of information, especially in the conditions of the modern toolkit, which allows for people to spread information within the course of solid seconds. And as you mentioned, mass media can become a very powerful tool in this endeavor, especially when we're talking about the spread and dissemination of false information. How can we make sure that the media is socially responsible? There's two main questions. First of all, what does media need to know and what it should not do? What it should do and what it should not do. And this is not only my opinion. In many international documents, this has been highlighted. The need of socially responsible media has been addressed by many states. And since we're talking about a democratic state, it is not the state that should use its levers and tools to regulate the field. That is not allowed. Instead, there should be mechanisms in place which will allow the field to self-regulate and ensure all of this. And the role of the state is only limited down, is relegated to providing the necessary conditions for that, environment for that. So its sole role is pushing it, furthering it, so that it will allow for the representatives of the field will understand their social responsibility that they're expected and will create mechanisms that will allow to avoid this dissemination of false news, disinformation, and responsibility towards the public. And one of the mechanisms we can use is the self-regulatory mechanisms of the field, and these mechanisms should be put in place. What we do is completely negate the possibility of forced regulation because we are a democratic state and these are the values that we carry. However, self-regulation or co-regulation is when the state gives legality to all of these mechanisms, takes interim measures which will allow the media to self-regulate. I don't want to call it an actual regulation proper, but it's a hybrid way of regulating the field. So there are some sprouts in Armenia that are testifying to this self-regulation. And I'm sure you all know that for over many years, a self-regulation mechanism has been developed. The people who have participated, many of them are here. But the real thing is the visibility, the acceptance of these mechanisms. The structure is not spread out enough so that the public and the media outlets can refer to them and the public would be protected and the mass media would be protected, so that even the mass media would be able to show the public that there is a tool, there's a means you can refer to and be protected. And this can also serve as a mold against the flows of misinformation. Unfortunately, we're not there yet. We would not be able to say in Armenia we have such developed mechanisms for the time being, but I think in this phase, the role of the government is on a legislative level, is to blaze the path for the mass media, allow them memberships to societies and availability, access to the mechanisms that have been put in place. It's not the government that clearly understands the need, but the European Council every year conducts a monitoring of the media and publishes a report. And this year and previous years as well they have confirmed in their report that there's a distinct need for the legislative validation of all of the media outlets. So how do we establish this? There's an actual need, and how do we boost or correct, if you will, all of the game players in the area so that they follow this path and become members of all of these bodies, or at least have mechanisms in place. Such steps have been taken in audiovisual media. I think the legislation has already stated that in order to acquire a license, audiovisual media needs to have a code of ethics in place. or self-regulatory mechanism. It could be the media ombudsman, or the certain TV channels have united with the acting regulatory body, and I know that they've all pretty much taken their separate ways, but we do have a regulation in only one specific sphere. And for this reason, we need to think to try to see how to make sure that all the subjects that consider themselves to be means or for public information, news outlets, media outlets who cater news, who can influence on the social public, that to make sure they are socially responsible and follow the ethics. Let's try to follow our timing. So in order to follow this trail, our goal now is to make sure that there's on a regulatory level, there's rules that if it's a classical mass media outlet, they need to have a self-regulation mise in place, or be members with or partake in the implementation of the mechanisms that have been put in place. Mr. Dadun's already mentioned that these are the first sprouts, but it seems like in the direction of self-regulatory, I think they started in 2007. I think you are at the very departure point of all of this. And when do you think this vision will ever come true, that where a mass media outlet will be responsible for actions, and that the courts will go against the administration and accept that the public interest necessitated the uncovering of such sensitive information? I'm also thankful that you remember 2007. That's pretty much when the initiative of self-regulation for mass media commenced. It's been 16 long years, and until today, we're confident that this initiative is an experiment by nature. The reason for this is that in many different respects, the media sphere does not have the necessary foundation to make self-regulation as a foundation, an important cornerstone for their activities. What do we need? What are we lacking as of now? I regret to tell you that all the different hardships and difficulties and the contradictions that we have faced, the division into different camps, the division between the media means, and even the survival we have to worry about, it does not allow media to just hinge on their own strength, their own powers, and to turn self-regulation as a phenomenon based on self-regulation. So one way or another, we have to put our hopes on their participation. So interference or influence is not what we're looking for, but direct participation on the side of the state. As major factors that will affect self-regulation, I think the encouragement by the government towards all of the media outlets that are only serving for the public interest should even be boosted. There are many different indicators and standards and mechanisms in place, but I think without incentive mechanisms that would encourage this participation, I think it would be impossible to develop a program like that.
And discussions are being held about this, and this is included in the five-year program of the government. And the second factor is the initiator's obligation, which is to make recognizable as much as possible all the self-regulatory mechanisms which could work, which could function. And here I should note that great contribution can be shown by international donors, and obviously this requires huge resources, and resources cannot be provided by the media, considering their grave conditions, financial conditions, and here the support of the donors is of crucial importance. And here we need to acknowledge the major international donors which have started to pay attention to this issue, which is the USAID, for example, which will launch in June. It will be on June 20, and they will be, and our media community can familiarize with the priorities included in it, and also by the European Union. There has been a competition for capacity building of media outlets, including the incentive mechanisms for these media outlets, in addition to what the state can do. And eventually we need to carry out work among the media outlets so that they can see what is the privilege, what is the advantage of joining the self-regulation mechanism. And considering all these concepts and advantages, they need to be informed about this so that they understand their own interests, and they understand that in terms of being protected and in this complex situation where the market is unable to provide quality, the existence of the quality media, or it is very limited, how they can use this mechanism that are proposed, that are offered by the state and by the international donor community. We have gone through several stages of capacity building for media outlets, and there have been various generations, and there has been a generation where we said that if we develop media as an independent business, all the related issues related to quality and public interest and all other related issues, if it's a business, then it will be auto-generated. So it is a libertarian approach. And considering the small market of Armenia, this model did not work. It did not work out. So the efforts that were made in this direction did not give the desired outcome. And now we have reached a point where it is recognized that we need public resources so that quality media also receives support and develops. And this is stated not only in Armenia, but also in the countries where the markets are large. And in any case, the idea of the public support is common. And based on this, we can build not only self-regulation concept, but all the strategy of development of media outlets throughout Armenia. And in addition to working with our colleagues in the government and legislative body, there is a memorandum signed in April last year. It is assumed that work will be carried out in 12 different directions, and this must be comprehensive. So it must be, all the efforts must be systemic in all the different directions and lead to the desired outcome. Thank you. I would like to approach the issue from a different perspective. We talked about different challenges. We talked about how the media outlets attempt anticipate support from the state and public, but also we have the established reality of accountability of the state bodies, and here we reach the limitation of communication means, and my colleagues raised the issue of the lack of communication or the barriers which are increasing, which is very concerning in a situation where we are facing a lot of challenges, where we are facing a lot of issues, and we're constantly hearing from our colleagues so that when they approach the state bodies for any response, they might not either not receive any response or receive it after 30 days. And after this period, the situation is changing and new realities are emerging. So based on my experience, I can say that from the State Department of the United States or European Union, it is easy to gain, to acquire information rather than from the state bodies of Armenia. And unfortunately, we do not have a ministry which would regularly or on monthly basis or on weekly basis would organize press conferences, meet with journalists, and update the journalists on a regular basis. So, Mr. Zargan, don't you think that this is due to the fact that this is because this is the reason that someone from across the ocean can make any changes in our reality, can affect our reality. Thank you, Ms. Bunyatian. I wish to note that this issue was raised during the previous panel, and I would repeat myself once again that yes, this has been noted, this has been recorded by the government, that there is an issue of communication and there is a clear roadmap adopted by us, which we will try to use to develop tools and mechanisms to address these issues raised by you. This will imply certain structures, certain mechanisms as to what ministry, what agency, what division, what officer has to deliver a response in what time frames and carry out communication. And here it is not only about the process of answering the inquiries, but also the necessity of and the mandatory procedure of transferring, of conveying information. The ministers are obliged to provide information regarding the program that they implement and to reach the beneficiaries at an appropriate period of time, because if they do not reach, an issue might arise, which is the omission of which is due to the omission of the ministry, and this issue should be addressed by all the agencies, and this is not only with the media, but also coordination between the agencies, and we should record that there are different issues regarding also this. And here the colleagues who are sitting here at this panel, Mr. Navasadyan, Ms. Nagdalyan, are also engaged in this process, and we aim to increase the cooperation between the communication between the state agencies and the independent experts, and also through international partners. And we have already established such cooperation, and we have reached such an agreement for cooperation, and our international partners are also ready to support us on this regard. And this issue has been recorded, and we are aiming for their solution. And as soon as we have such communication mechanisms where all the details are specified, all the obligations are specified, we can easily monitor who has made a mistake, who has made some omissions. And I think Mr. Navasadyan would remember that when we were speaking about the public communication monitoring mechanisms of state bodies, the civil society will have a great contribution. So they will be able to evaluate, to monitor, and based on this evaluation, certain steps can be taken to improve the situation. So this much regarding the topic, and I would like to make a short observation regarding regulation. If I may, I agree with Mr. Datuns that state has to refrain from self-regulation process of the state media. They should not intervene, they should not hinder, they should not transform it into propaganda means. But here a conflict arises where the communication is observed not only as a work with the media or by media, but in general, when we observe the information sources, we see that information is disseminated not only through media, they are disseminated through Telegram channels, through anonymous channels, through Facebook bloggers, YouTube streamers. And when we speak about self-regulation and the self-regulation of media, this enormous segment is left out. And when the state just stands aside and is not allowed to make any regulations in this field, the first who would suffer will be the media. I would like to bring several fresh examples. During the last month, the media outlets disseminated information which psychologically terrorized our citizens. They affect negatively the national security, the negotiation process. There are media outlets that use Azerbaijani thesis the day before the negotiations in Brussels, for example. The Armenian media or the media that presents itself as Armenian disseminates reprints, republications of Azerbaijani articles. And 2 days ago, a YouTube streamer invited a guest who informed that in the morning that day, in the area of Nerkinhand, we had 6 captured persons, and you might imagine what effect this has on the families that have soldiers on the border. And the issue is that the problem is that if the Ministry of Defense refutes this in 5 minutes, this kind of disinformation will reproduce with the incalculable resources and incalculable time. So I don't think that the state has to refrain from regulating the communication process. So the sources that were identified as media outlets and are transparent in terms of financial resources and in their reports, the state should not intervene here, because we should have solid self-regulation mechanisms, and we believe that the media outlets can have such mechanisms. But when we resort to the sources, when we come to the sources which are uncontrollable and they will not be part of any self-regulatory body, and it is just unimaginable that these YouTube channels can become part of self-regulation mechanism. Here the state has something to do. So we reached the point where on the one hand we admit that the state is not going, or doesn't consider that they should intervene in regulation when it comes to mass media. But anyhow, as Mr. Tsarukan noted, we leave a certain gap where there might be certain regulations upon need, as needed. So I would like to ask, can we limit a field which is regularly revolutionizing, or we should go through the path to increase the trust in these official bodies and media outlets, because both of them are facing such issues?
Thank you. First of all, I'm very grateful to all of our colleagues who, after all of these long discussions, have stayed for the panel discussion as well. Thank you very much. Allow me to tell you that I think the free and independent media is the life juice of a healthy and free society, but it's also one of the guarantors that any limitation against free media basically puts democratic value in the country at stake. Free media is very important for the role playing of the ombudsman and for the accountability of the state, of the government, of the authorities, and it's one of the main guarantors of the realization of our role, the human right of being informed. I think in the long line of all these responsibilities, there's the sense of responsibility that could be attributed to mass media as well. They're accountable to the human citizens because they present their interests and they're the voice thereof. And as you mentioned, they need to enjoy the trust and the support of the public. As to how we can regulate the public interest, and this is not only a discussion that is taking place in the Armenian society, all societies are discussing this. It's difficult to find the thin line, the balance where it begins, the public interest begins, and what measures we need to take to protect it, and what limits can be used. You did say that the authorities have used limitations for regulation. I think the best and the brightest example was during the pandemic, and there were regulations that would stem from it accordingly. But how to make sure there's regulation of the sphere? I cannot say it has to be solely by the government or by the news media or the civil society. It's difficult to tell, but I want to say that all of the role players taken together need to define the rules of the game, the principles according to which the regulation is going to take place. I myself, having large experience in civil society and the general field, there's some basic principles that need to be the foundation of the regulation. First and foremost, it is the provision of freedom of speech. Free and independent media needs to act without any censorship or influence, need to be guaranteed free activity without the threat of a vendetta. Regulation, I think, it's not about getting information from one source. There need to be multiplicity of opinions so that the society can enjoy different sides, different sources for information, and can make informed observations. So anybody, any regulatory body, be it from the authorities or civil society, that need to ensure the landscape for multiplicity of opinion. Another factor are the ethical and professional standards. And of course, mass media is the cornerstone for any healthy society. So there should be ethical and professional standards that they will follow and hence enjoy the full trust of the public. And the survey that we conducted, it was very widely spread, even on the pages of different news outlets. It did show that there's very little trust towards governmental bodies and officials. But there's another worrying indicator in the report, which stated that 29% of the surveys, they show that the mass media in Armenia are not independent. More than 40%, they don't think they're biased. And the rest, they think they spread disinformation, and 5% think that they're corrupt. Hence, we can say that the level of trust from the public to mass media is very low. So if we're saying that it's the state that needs to increase the level of trust in the public, it shouldn't be only be worrying the state, but also the mass media. So in the course of all the fervent discussions I've been having during the past week, it is important that we regulate how much visibility they get on broadcast, who appear on the television, what kind of language is being used during the television visibility. all of the regulations should stem from the protection of human rights. We need to avoid centralization of mass media in the hands of individuals and different organizations. In any system that is to be introduced, like the one that was introduced during the pandemic, should be transparent and acceptable by everyone. It should be unbiased and also very flexible and dexterous to have resilience towards different issues. And the development of any problem should be based on the dialogue between all of the stakeholders. I want to emphasize this strongly because it should be based on dialogue. Thank you very much. And continuing on the topic that you mentioned, you spoke about raising the level of trust towards different media outlets. If you remember, they were talking a lot about, after the pandemic, especially the transparency of true owners and to benefactors. And after the legislative reforms, I think the verification and certification was introduced by the mass media outlets. And I did study all of these inventories that had been made. I think I did know names that were familiar, but a lot of names did not really ring a bell. There's a television in the region of Ararat, whose owner is a 27-year-old young man. In Aragazotan, it's a 52-year-old woman. Even more surprising to me was that in the agency of the state register does not have enough functions and capabilities to verify the validity of all of the statements provided. Was this reform pro forma? What do you think, Mr. Dados? Did it really change anything in our lives? It is no secret that we have such problem. After the introduction of this institution, the steering levers have not really been defined in order to verify the truthfulness of all of this information. We're even in the phase that all of the, as far as I know from the statistics, the half of these subjects, they haven't even presented the inventories of true owners. In this phase, the function of the ministry's register is only going to be relegated to, it's just forcing them to present through administrative fines or administrative proceedings the need for them to present this inventory and then check the validity thereof. I don't know if you know or not, but the ministry has already developed on an expert level, it is still being developed, the anti-corruption strategy plan, which presumes the strategic directions, specifically in one list is how do we strengthen the functioning of the registry, both legislatively and in terms of resources, benchmarking the good international practice so that the body will be able to check the validity of this data. So far, we don't have anything in place, but in the next phase of the development, we will be specifically dealing with these directions. Thank you, Mr. Navasatyan. Continuing this thought, can we say that the government can then say that, you know, I have brought you here to this point, they've all been publicized, and then the journalists can pursue this, just the way that, for example, all the inventories that have been publicized by different officials so that they can increase trust. Why is this mechanism not functioning? Even if the journalists try, it needs to be stated, and the representative HETK, because I know they have made multiple efforts, that they would testify that even when journalism pursue and chase them, there's not enough grounds to openly state that the sources are available, accessible for the journalists. It might spare no efforts, but to no avail. Just sticking to the same tune. We need to speak about the alternative ways for governmental regulations that are somehow connected with self-regulation as well. The international good practice goes a long way here. And first and foremost, I think the company Journalists Without Borders initiative should be, it's also called Journalism Trust Initiative. It's an initiative to increase trust towards journalists, which presumes a survey list, which is pretty comprehensive. And by answering or participating in the surveys, declaring their, ownerships, their assets, their actives, they can receive a certain status. Journalists Without Borders, and in line with their code, they receive a certification that they're transparent, that they're open for the public. And this certification presumes that they should also have some kind of role in the field. But both it needs to be tied with certain the possibility of using certain financial resources, but also should indicate their partnership and connections with the business. So if the representatives of the business are sensing some kind of responsibility, that need to take into account the transparent activities of the media outlets, so that the advertising agencies, the advertising flows can pursue the same strain. It's an idealistic perception indeed, but I do know that in Armenian there are business associations that pay due attention to ethics in business, and journalism is a part of business as well. And being driven by this, that might encourage these, encourage the participation of these news outlets or media outlets through cooperation, through advertising. So as far as auto-regulation is concerned, do we offer or propose only to media outlets or also business? So these should be tied together closely. You can motivate business with truthful information, depending, of course, on the size of the audience or the influence on the audience by different media outlets. So if there's research, truthful and valid research delivered to the business, that necessitating that they will take this into account in their advertising policy, this could perhaps be a motivating lever. Of course, I'm now delving into more complex mechanisms, but without them, there's no success. The nature of the market has changed in recent years. These are not the same media outlets that could just relegate to providing quality produce, and saying, I'm the Guardian, I'm the Financial Times, I'm this and that, and just hinging on this reputation, I can just exist without worrying about surviving. But these are mechanisms that all should pursue, and whether we want it or not, the role of the state is going to have to be very big. And it's not something to be forced, but rather encouraged through incentives. And when we're talking about the state, we're talking about both the courts and the executive body and the judicial body, and all of them are involved. And if you know, it only the means of media means who are following the rules of ethics and legitimacy are only using the human right for truthful information. So only when you are basically doing your job properly enough to provide the quality product that the society is expecting, only then you can be called to be catering for the public interest.
Thank you. During discussions, I heard that they keep saying that we're working on it, it will happen. So about when you're speaking about self-supervision structures, for me, the greatest question is that on the one hand, we have multiple questions, and and dissemination of disinformation, both by internal actors and external actors, by well-known actors and unknown actors, controlled and uncontrolled actors. And on the other hand, we are starting to speak about strategies and the improvements, understanding that this will require time. What hinders the government or state agencies to have regular contacts once a week or once a month and convene press conferences until those strategies and structures are in place? In fact, the answer to your question is individual, and it has to be addressed to each official of the individual ministry and agency, since I don't, as an government communication responsible officer, I don't have any control mechanisms over them so far. It will be hard for me to answer in their stead. What about the time frames? As to the time frames, we expect that we will have it developed by autumn and approved by the end of the year. So by the next year, they will be already functioning. And before going back to the questions, I would like to clarify, based on your recent study, for you as an expert who did the research and what is your impression about the state and public communication? They do not hear each other, and is that because of it that people consider that the country is following a wrong path? Is it the reason? I would not like to give any qualification to our inquiry, but you observed rightly that this is that the steps taken by the state are not quite understandable by the society. You are talking about the wrong and right paths, but I would also like to speak about the anti-corruption reforms and the public awareness, which is very low according to the surveys. And this is an indicator that, yes, there is a gap in communication, there is a problem in communication, and we are now witnessing that it is a policy of one individual, and this is a communication by one individual with the public, and we should enlarge the scope of communication. This is an indicator that there is an information gap, a vacuum, which can rapidly be filled with disinformation or with questionable actors which are not in the best interest of the government. And yes, this is an indicator that the government and all the state apparatus has to be more proactive. And in addition to what Mr. Zarugan said about the communication channels, this lays the foundation for communication. As you said, there is a need for a communication strategy. There is a need now more than ever, because we're living in a reality where not only Armenia, but also all the emergency situations and crises are part of our daily reality. And what we had before now doesn't work any longer. And based on the new reality, we should develop new communication channels and put them in use, and to see how they will work in the future. And I propose to pass on to the questions from the audience. Geram. Hello. I'm Partanyan Geram from Media Initiative Center. I'm the editor. I'm looking at the list of our speakers, and I'm talking to people in the corridors, and maybe I'm wrong, but I don't see any broadcaster from the public should he be here or not? Because what we are talking about now, about reliable media, about proactive steps by the state, about filling the vacuum, and I think that here the public TV channel has a specific role to play because they're receiving funds and they're in the best situation in terms of financing. And I would like you to speak, Mr. Navasadyan, probably you and also others. The cameramen of the public TV were not allowed inside. So this speaks of the failure of the public television. It was because of the format of our forum, which is not the shooting cast was not allowed inside any. I think that here, I'm not speaking about the list of speakers, it is not within my power, but if we're speaking about the public broadcaster in general as the most important institution, we should state that it is not well established, and we should not sufficient efforts are being made in this direction, and this is also this leads to the fact that their model is unknown, uncertain what powers they have. It is good that the public TV has become a part of the initiative of self-regulation, and we could say that the cooperation is quite successful with them. But at the same time, they are still resisting the concept of having an own ombudsman, and because they are avoiding accountability of providing assessments to political statements. When I'm following the interviews, there is a high level of displeased people because they don't see any, and I don't know the translation of the word, but they are quite defensive. In English, it means defensive, and they're very defensive. And in this case, no state institution, no public institution can develop and improve their activity. But I'm hopeful that in any case, a dialogue between civil society and experts community will be established together with the representatives of the public broadcaster, and it will give fruits within the near future, especially when there is a dialogue planned and there is a willingness for this dialogue, and we will work together, and maybe we will find some legal levers so that the public TV performs its obligations. Liana Saadjan, Deputy Editor-in-Chief of HEDC. My question is to Mr. Saadjan and Daduns. Last year, I was present at the signing of the Memorandum of Understanding for the joint strategy and all the legislative legal acts stemming from it. And but on the one hand, there is this paper, there's this document and discussions about them, but on the other hand, the legislative power initiates legal changes, for example, on state secret or information about ecological information, which is not discussed within in the scope of this document, and they are not jointly elaborated, and even there is a statement by the media that this document, which has been signed, does not serve its purpose, and they are left out of discussions, and they are even calling for the president not to sign these amendments. How would you explain this situation? How sincere is the government in their intent of their initiative to define their legislative reforms jointly, and can we believe in this in the success of these initiatives? Thank you. As for us, on our part, the draft law on state secret has been developed by the government, and there were complaints, contentment, and there were debates and discussions. As far as I know, I wasn't part of the development of this document, but I'm aware that there have been debates and discussions. And as for the mass media reforms, just the fact that it has been already 1.5 years that it has been discussed, and there is no concept yet, speaks of the fact that we're closely cooperating with the representatives of the field, and without their consent, without their agreement, this portion of the law of the self-regulation of mass media could not advance, and we tried to preserve this cooperation within the development of this draft law. I would delve deeper into this issue, and are you sure that there is sufficient cooperation between the different agencies of the government for the certain legislative? Please, can you speak in the microphone? Microphone. I apologize for interruption. During the previous panel discussion, an example was brought of the death rates of COVID, and the two agencies, the Ministry of Health and Statistics Committee, have been providing different data because probably they are guided by different methodologies. So these two state agencies are giving different data on the same rate. So it is obvious that there is no coordination between them, and to some extent, it is probably the one of the factors of the issue is exactly this, because the experts community, the civil society or media community can engage in a serious dialogue with a state agency and come to a common ground. But from another state agency, another initiative may come which contradicts the reached agreements. And we saw this reflection in the draft law on the state secret. And it seems that they start to understand each other, but another state agency might interfere and bring in a different approach to the question. And this is number one. And second issue is that there is the so-called Institute of Political Decision, which I think can have constructive dialogues and discussions, but a different and opposing decision might be adopted, might be made based on the political decision. So based on political interests, contradicting a different decision might be made. So there are multiple reasons. Although I could not manage to participate in the opening ceremony, but I managed to follow the speech of the Prime Minister, and I should disagree with him on one aspect, that the main threat to democracy is external in Armenia. But I believe that there are many internal threats as well, and one of them is when we speak about democracy, are the efficient procedures and democracy becomes functional and institutionalized. And we can speak about functional democracy when there are clear procedures, and the lack of these procedures among us lead to the fact that required cooperation does not take place. And one of examples is the memorandum you mentioned, but the concept of self-regulation, I hope that will be the topic where we will prove that it is possible to have efficient cooperation and it is in the best interest of everyone. And if it succeeds, maybe it will serve as an example for other areas, for other cases.
Thank you very much. I want to make a few clarifications, two clarifications, one being good, the other being bad. I want to clarify a few things. The good thing is that the draft law was given back to the authors. It's been claimed back, and this took place due to the severe criticism that it received specifically from journalistic organizational institution. Ina Karapetyan's was with me. It was pretty harsh criticism that they received. We're trying to identify why it was done 2 days after the author took back the draft, and it's not in circulation. The bad news I have for you today is that yes, as far as sensitive information and is concerned, there was the rule that was enacted in an entire package of rules, which one of which actually touched upon freedom of information. There were only 5 words that were added, only in the information that are meant for limited service circulation are only included there. It does clearly state what they mean, obviously, but by that statement, it's so generic that it's difficult to even see it. It just creates better grounds for completely refusing the package. It can be referred to, and official information can be refuted in that way. And in this regard, yes, we witnessed, once the memorandum was signed, different bodies, for example, the ministry, it can develop and put up on eDraft, the platform, a legislation that the group of experts, the expert committee, or whatever committee, the head of the committee might not be even informed about it. So during the meeting, it was us who informed them, and we told them, see, this is the draft, and what do you think about that? And quite honestly, they said, if I'm not mistaken, I think it was the Ministry of Justice, developed by them. It was the law on the special regime on military situation. It was debated on the public television and then the Ministry of Justice. And for now, it's been pending like that. It's stopped for now because the head of the same committee had said that with this package, you're going to have serious problems in the parliament. There are many questions for which you don't have answers. You fail to provide those answers. And I'm in full agreement with Boris that they themselves, the governmental institutions that lack the cooperation we expect them to have, and there's need for that. And I do believe that our governmental system is not organized at all, and there are lots of problems to be solved. But the very narrow direction, or maybe not as narrow as we took it, there was the expert committees and the parliament or the Ministry of Justice. They have taken over to devise, if you will, a protocol. I stayed for this discussion to clarify a few things for Mr. Dadons, actually. Thank you very much, Mr. Dadunt. In the very beginning, when I was speaking about the Pentagon documents, I was expecting an answer for you to speak exactly about this, the military situation law, and I really hope we'll receive the answers we're expecting. Harutsun Mansourian, you're welcome. Good afternoon. I'm from the Head Media Factory. Just one remark, and then I have a question for you. The most I heard, there's two words. One is should. It's the modal verb should that is spoken a lot, which I do not think really applies to this situation. The second word was interest, which in this case comes off predominantly as public interest. But in recent times, I think you might call it public. You call it public, but if I'm wrong, please correct me. It's divided into state interest, national interest. One of the MPs in the parliament even contradicted these two, and it says that a state interest takes precedence over personal interest, and there's perhaps a thing they try to silence or manipulate the media somehow. It smells like manipulation. I don't know. But what I try to understand, the national state interest, is it perceived by the media outlets? Is it perceived duly as it is, or even the state bottom, or has it been defined, formulated at all? Because very often they use it as a lever to silence the media or to guide or to direct them. And very often the media outlets use this terminology to justify and to say that, oh, this is okay, this is this is useful for the state and for the people, and that's it. And even subjectively, would you say which really takes precedent for you? I believe obviously public interest is a little more generic. Perhaps I was the one using it more frequently. I'll take the lead in answering your question. The question, I understand, we perceive it to be more philosophical in nature, or has to do with a lot of definitions and terminology. For me, there's no difference between public interest and state or national interest. I hope they're the same, or in an ideal country, they are the same, and that's what we have to be striving for, at least. But when I use it, the term public interest, or the correspondence of the activities of media outlets to it, I think I perceive it to be very instrumental. So by answering certain indicators, they can show that they are acting, considering or taking into account the public interest. So this relates to both the financial sources and the declaration thereof, or they follow certain code or professional or ethical principles they follow. If there's any way we can research this and see to what extent the accountability or the responsibility they have been taken over by this media outlet and how well they're performing, we might be able to infer from that this particular outlet is acting in line with the public interests. Other instrumental or more well-defined terms I cannot propose right now, but what I want is for everyone to view everything in practice and not in theory. Because for abstract discussions, there are other culprits, other platforms, or maybe even other experts to deal with it. Other people who would like to respond? Any other questions? No questions. Wonderful. I would like to thank you once again, all of our guests, Mr. Boris Navadarian, head of the Media Club in Yerevan, Tigran Daduns, Public Relations and Information Center NGO Director Gor Tsarukyan, and the program coordinator of International Republican Institute, Anna Nakhtalyan. I was told that the closing ceremony is awaiting us, and a small coffee break. I'm not sure about that, but the closing ceremony is awaiting you downstairs. Thank you.